Good afternoon and good morning. I'm Kimberly Torkelson. On behalf of 451 Research and Perimeter X, I'd like to welcome everyone and say thank you for attending today's webcast. By way of housekeeping, today's event will run between 45 and 60 minutes, including time at the end for you to ask questions. The slides will be available for download at the end of the presentation. You can submit questions via the text box below. Leading off the presentation today from 451 is Eric Ogren, Senior Analyst of Information Security. Following Eric will be Omri Iluz, CEO of Perimeter X, and after that we will have a quick Q&A to address questions from the audience. With that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
Terrific. Thank you, Kimberly. And I'm pleased to meet all of you, and thank you for taking time out of your day. And I'm happy to talk about security with Omri. And I just want to be able to talk about web behavior analytics, which is really taking website security by storm, and present a picture for that, and then drill down into Perimeter X. After about 15 minutes of what I am seeing out there in the marketplace. So with that, let's get started, and we'll just dive right into things. So the main things I want to focus on here is the need to protect against business logic, and we don't hear that a lot about web security, but it's an important concept in that. Business logic is just a normal flow, and we find attackers abuse it, and they do it for very pragmatic reasons. The pragmatic reason is, basically they don't have to write and distribute a lot of code. The other impression I want to leave you with is that web application firewalls for years have been synonymous with website security. I mean, people will look and say, I either scan the code and fix problems, or I slap a WAF in front of it. But that doesn't really look at business logic, and it doesn't solve the problems that we have from bots. And bots are a really, really huge issue that drives a lot of the evolution and the next generations of threats to your websites. And then I wanted to be able to leave you with next steps, some recommendations of how you can proceed and how you should look at this. So to start, I wanted to actually put on your thinking caps and think like a hacker. Let's have some fun with this. This is a traditional process that I have. It's kind of an anti-fraud example from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, as it turns out, and it's a classic type of attack. It starts at the very top at 12 o'clock with target the victim. How do we identify who the user is? And you can see in the small text with phishing and spear phishing and social engineering, it already starts with business logic. I mean, in this case, it's a simple. Let me back up here. I think it starts with a simple email, and that contains a link. And people receive emails. They click on links all the time. There's nothing new about this. It just turns out that the hackers, are starting to use this to their advantage. Now, classically, we've been trained to think, okay, a victim is targeted, and some piece of malware comes in and gets installed on your computer. And in security terms, what I see is a lot of security dollar investment is going into this, find vulnerabilities, find exploits, and patch cycles. But we're not really talking about that here. This, the world has moved on a bit, and we'll see a little bit of that more in action there. Once the malware is installed, it's a fairly simple matter to start going to online banking sites. In this case, it's a fraud case, but it's easy enough to follow links and do other types of transactions. Collect all the data you want, transmit it, and then number 6 here is mule accounts, and what that is going to translate to is the ability to actually reuse the information you have. Many people use the same username, like an email address and passwords all the time across sites. So once you find one set of credentials that works, that grants you access, it's not that hard to go find another site where those same credentials will work. Okay. So let's see. I modified the picture here to show what it might look like. Thinking of a hacker on a website side of things, we target the victims, and in this case, it's websites. Really high success odds. It's simple arithmetic and mathematics. You can rent password lists. They're cheap. Username, password combinations, and just launch them at the site. And the easiest example of business logic abuse is at the login screen. When we talk about account takeover, is you submit a username and password, and you have an army of bots doing it, so it's low and slow. They don't all come from the same apparent source. And what happens is the website tells you if you got in or not. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. If the credential doesn't work, you get an error message and you move on. If it does work, you just set that aside, say, check, I'm in, and then try the next pair. And at the end of the pass, you have a list of credentials that is going to work with that website, that you can then come in and do whatever damage you want in terms of stealing data or creating other kind of fraud activities. I mean, when I say simple arithmetic is, if you have a list of potential credentials that is, say, 100,000 or a million, say a million long, and it's a 2% hit rate, you can just do the arithmetic, and it's a pretty lucrative business. So you target the victims, you rent password lists, you can stuff credentials, you can create fake accounts with easy to find credit card information, and then you just follow the links. You can scrape data. There's no malware required in your browser. So, and if you put malware into a browser, you don't have to distribute malware into the corporate environment to steal the data and to be able to cause damage. You just click on the links and follow the links, and just abuse the logic that's presented to you. I mean, and at the end of the day, the website delivers you the information you need. You don't even need to have any kind of malware with data exfiltration. It is a simple matter of just scraping and retaining what the website already presents to you. It's an interesting way of thinking of website security now. You still need to recover your tracks, but then on the other end, with the mule accounts, is we see customers reuse them. So if you're at one shopping site, your same username, password, and just personally, you probably know this already. You probably use the same password on multiple sites, and the hackers know this, and they take advantage of it, and they either find those other sites themselves, or these are valid credentials, and they use them. They can resell them. They have value, and let other hackers and fraudsters do their thing. We're going to talk. Well, I'm not going to talk. Omri is going to talk about some of the browser generation problems. I mean, one thing that strikes me that is a neat example is you can actually have malware sit in a browser that waits until after the authentication. So all the two-factor authentication kind of stuff you may have invested in, the malware just waits till you've already authenticated. It knows what you're using, and then it can step in after that and take over the transactions and start doing its thing. So it's really pretty sophisticated stuff, and you really can't rely so much on the classic vulnerabilities, because there's no vulnerabilities there to spot. The bots are cheap to rent. They fake out business logic. They look like real users. They look like real servers. They stuff credentials, which is username, passwords. They take over accounts once they're in there. Data theft and fraud is pretty understandable there. They scrape content, and application DDoS comes up a lot. And it comes up a lot in ways that you wouldn't think of. I have seen enterprises in the hospitality industry, for instance, where bots that want to keep up to date, competitors want to keep up to date with the latest prices, for rooms, for instance. And they follow the links, they click on a room, they check it to get the price and scrape the price, and then they move on to the next room. But what happens is those user interfaces are built for people. It's kind of cool. They're built for people. They put a reservation hold for 15 minutes, so you can decide that you want the room. You can get your credit card. You can complete the transactions. But the big thing is, it's a reservation hold for 15 minutes. But the bot has automatically already moved to the next room, and then room after that, and the room after that. So every couple of hours when the bots run through to check prices, your business is offline, and you can't take reservations because you've got these fake reservation holds. It's just one of these kind of unintentional DOS attacks that is totally bot driven. And this is a sign of how we've progressed. This is Sentry MBA, which is a pretty well-known tool from the dark web. And I won't go through Sentry MBA. We can do that elsewhere, but it's a real tool, and you can see it's very professionally done. Um, even images database captures won't help you with things like that because the hackers know that they can buy capture recognition patterns and logic to be able to bypass all that kind of stuff. It's not a simple matter, but it's a relatively straightforward matter of targeting websites and giving it a list of credentials to try and some parameters, and off it goes. Really, really very, very sophisticated type of tool. And that's why we start seeing the prevalence of attacks against business logics through websites. And that's exactly why web behavior analytics is the new frontier. Because the best way, I used to say the only way, but the best way to catch this is looking at the behavior. Is something just out of whack? Is the configuration not quite consistent? Are users behaving differently? Do people log in and then not proceed on the website, but they just drop offline automatically and then try to log in again from the same IP address? Things like that aren't vulnerabilities, exploits, and patching. That just doesn't help anymore. It's how do you look at normal, approved logic that's happening? So fake logins, fake accounts, impersonating users and servers. As we get into API use, we're going to see more and more of that. But basically, all the users have to do for business logic is just follow the links. They just use the very permissions that your website gives you, and then they conduct commerce or scrape data that they can use for competitive reasons, and the website delivers it. You don't need to embed any software back inside behind the firewall and on the web servers or databases or anything like that. The web server does it for you, which is a nice advantage. So those are the main things that drive WBA and keeps it in the forefront, and it leads to a pretty burgeoning marketplace. From 260 million in this year, and this is a bottom-up type of number that I came up with. This comes from my research that was published earlier, about the middle of this year. So these are actual values, and it's probably a bit low. And I see this market as really touching $1 billion by 2021. So it's growing very rapidly because there's no other way to solve the problem. And that I think is what's leading you to this webinar. So here's a quote I had from actually it was a while ago, some CSO online, but basically saying that today's web apps, you need more than just firewalls. We can't get smart enough about web security, and this was in 2004, which just kind of blew me away. So it's taken the industry some time to get here, to mature to where we are. But the good news is we're getting there, and it's a really positive thing. PCI is one of our one of the major prescriptive type of standards out there that is often mimicked and copied. Years ago, they were the ones that promoted web application firewalls and code scanning as the bar for website security. But now PCI and you'll see OWASP in a second are starting to say, hey, there are other approaches here about protecting against web-based attacks, and it's to be able to continually check all traffic to make sure that people that maybe have authenticated, that this session hasn't been taken over, things that WAFs just don't do and can't do easily. And I throw this in here just to open up your mind, thinking that a web behavior analytics product is going to make a lot of sense for you. And we're seeing some of this come out of the OWASP taxonomy now is created for bot-driven attacks on the web. We just decided, well, not we just decided, I like to say we, OWASP decided they needed a common taxonomy to be able to talk about these threats. So I have the link included here of the Automated Threat Handbook, and I'd encourage you to check it out. And it goes through the different types of scenarios. and you can map them to your business and see which ones make sense and get an understanding as you start learning more about Perimeter X of how Perimeter X solves those issues for you. And I put this in here. I went back and forth on this for you a little bit. But is automation coming to OWASP top 10? The original slide basically was showing how slow we are to react at the top 10 from the web security organization. Is all about SQL injection and cross-site scripting and a lot of configuration issues. But what I'm starting to see in some of the chat rooms and some of the conversations from the OWASP people is a desire to put automation into the top OWASP top 10. I mean, it's that prevalent, it's that strong a thing. I can't put it in the slide yet because I haven't done it, but it is something as an analyst I would say you should be able to look forward to in the next rendition here of in the top 10 attacks, which is a really, really powerful statement. How are we doing? Okay, cool. And a couple more things. One is, and this is actually my favorite slide. It's the most important features of security products, and just sort of jumping ahead to the product side. It's something we asked at 451 Research, the same questions of vendors and enterprises. In this case, we represented them as users, and I just found the difference fascinating. And the differences are those arrows coming in from the left side. Is that users say, "Hey, I really need something that supports my mission-critical processes that prevents damage to those processes, works in the background, that doesn't involve any of the users, and integrates with other products." So basically, I can't think of a better example of those attributes than web behavior analytics. It doesn't require any two-factor authentication or disrupt the user experience one iota. It works in the background to strip out bot traffic, and in my experience, bot traffic is probably about 40% of your website traffic. I mean, it's a ton of it out there that you'll be exposed to and experience. It perfectly aligns with the business and is really doing what security should be doing. And with that, I believe, here we go. I thank you for that time and attention. I wanted to tee up Ami, the CEO of Perimeter X, who has he will do actually more of a technology dive for you than I could possibly do. So Ami,
thank you, Eric. Thank you so much for giving this overview and welcome everyone. So my name is Omri Iluz, and I'm the founder and CEO of Perimeter X. Our product, Bot Defender, focused on identifying bots and other automated threats to websites. And we do this by utilizing advanced JavaScript techniques that are allowing us to collect hundreds of parameters about the user, about the browser, and most importantly, about the interaction between the user and the application. Things like mouse movements and clicks and sensor data that really gives us a good representation. Is this a human being or is this a bot? I'm also going to share today insights from our research and live attack data, as well as try to look at the evolution of bots and really how we got to where we are today. A very common question that I'm getting from customers is, why should I care about bots? And my answer is always the same. You shouldn't care about bots. You should care about the damage that bots are causing to your website, the attacks that they are carrying. Bots are just a carrier, a method, and they make so much damage. They can carry so many different types of attacks, and they evolve over time. Whether you are a security professional or whether you are a business owner, the damage from bots pose significant risk to your business. And this is actually part of the problem because the damage from bots usually lie between security and business logic abuse, as Eric mentioned. Now, anything that falls between two categories is usually not getting enough focus, even if it is very important and can cause a lot of damage. On this slide, I am listing the top threats, the top attacks that we have seen from bots And they range from pure security concerns on the top to getting closer to business logic abuse on the bottom. The most popular attack we've seen in recent months is account takeover, and Eric touched on that a little bit. Account takeover is the practice of someone trying a different combination of username passwords on your login page, and because everyone reuse passwords, they have a very successful attack, very good percentage of users that are able to compromise. And I'll show you something live about that a little bit later. Second, we see fake user creation. Whether the attacker is creating fake users in order to collect the discount code that the website is giving for a new user, or whether they do it to get the 30-day free trial to watch movies, attackers are creating thousands and millions of fake users, so they have a bank of user accounts to use on that website. Carding is a very old problem. Carding refers to both credit card and gift card abuse. The attacker comes with an understanding of the structure of the number of a gift card or a credit card, and they can simply try hundreds of millions of combinations until they find a gift card with a balance that they can go back and sell in the dark marketplaces. Now we are getting closer to business logic abuse in concerns that doesn't seem like security, but still pose very deep security threats to the business. And I'm talking about marketing fraud. Ever since people started paying for traffic, so whether you're using advertisement and paying for clicks, or you use affiliates and you pay them by the revenue that they drive to your website, you just created motivation for the attackers to send you fake traffic. You pay per user, they send you a bot, they collect payment, which costs them nothing. This is one of the most sophisticated attacks. It's in existence since the late 90s, but it's evolved significantly. Content theft is the practice of your competitors or your users simply scraping your website. So if you own a commerce website, your competitors want to know your prices. If you own a newspaper that's behind a paywall, your users want to consume your content for free. And they'll do this by sending bots to scrape the traffic. And last, I want to talk about a threat that most of you probably have not heard about. I'm talking about checkout abuse. It's a very much business logic problem. If you ever try to buy a popular show ticket like Hamilton or Adele, if you ever try to buy a very hyped product, a very limited stock product like the new iPhone or the new Air Jordans, you know that it's impossible. Within minutes, the entire inventory is gone. And to understand why, you need to really look at the traffic and the data. Bots are responsible for nearly 100% of these purchases. They take the ticket or the shoe and they immediately resell it on the second market. So if you don't understand why you can't buy Hamilton tickets for $150, but you can go on StubHub and buy them for $500, this is why. And luckily, the site owners, the marketplaces have paid attention, and now they're starting to deploy more and more technology to prohibit bots from buying these limited stock items. But how did we get here? This is a very dire situation, and the bots have evolved significantly. We are actually identifying 4 steps in the evolution of bots since the late 90s. Bots actually started as simple scripts. All you could do is make one request. Then early 2000s, as people started blocking these bots, they added the ability to understand HTML, understand state and session and cookies. As defenses came for this generation of bots, we started seeing headless browsers, which we'll talk more about today, around beginning of 2010. But the most current attacks, the most advanced bots that we are seeing these days are really infected users. Malicious extension, malware that really takes over the user machines and applies the payload directly from the user machine. I'm going to dive a little bit into the 4 generations to give you an explanation of what's going on. A generation 1 bot is really simple. Think about the late 90s Google crawler or any kind of login brute force back then. It's very easy to block these bots. You just put a cookie in place, for example, a CSRF cookie, and they can't understand it. They can't bypass it. They still come from a good IP because they use a proxy and they send the right user agent because they record the traffic. But as you can see on the bottom chart, everything else is wrong. The cookies, the JavaScript, the browser identification, the user activity, of course, is wrong. A second generation bot really starts understanding the web better. They start parsing the HTML, they maintain cookies, so they can go through the login process. They can carry over the CSRF token from the first page of the login or the first step of the checkout all the way to the last, and they can apply more abuse. Detecting these bots is relatively simple. You simply apply some JavaScript challenge, and because they can't execute JavaScript, they won't be able to return the right answer. A third generation bot is where things start to be really interesting. Third generation bots are composed on top of testing tools like Phantom and Selenium. These are real browser cores. So I'm talking about WebKit or Firefox that has an automation layer on top of them. There's no head, meaning there's no user controlling the session, there's no UI for the browser, but there's a scripting engine that can execute any payload. Usually these bots would come from data centers like AWS, but executed through a proxy network. The best approach to detect these bots is to try and challenge the browser. Because they are using just the core of a browser and not real browser, you are able to identify nuances in the way that the browser renders images or sounds, in the way that the sensor information is received, to say, this is not really an iPhone, this is just an iPhone emulator, or this is not really Chrome 53, but this is Phantom running WebKit, an older version of Chrome that says it is Chrome 53. So once you are able to detect these nuances, and of course the user behavior, you'll be able to detect that these are not good users. And the latest generation, a 4th generation bot, is what we really want to talk about today. A 4th generation bot is a malware that infected a real user either by injecting a malicious extension or by simply executing the browser in a hidden window or in a virtual desktop. The problem starts with that it's a real user machine. You can't use any IP reputation. You can't rely on seeing the cookies or the user agent or running JavaScript or browser. They're all legitimate. You actually have user interaction coming from the same browser. So what you're left to identify is the interaction with the current page, for example, the login page or the checkout page, really indicates that there is a human being driving this session. Are we seeing clicks in the right places and in the right timing? Are we seeing the right mouse movement? When the user just clicked on the login button, was there a focus in event? Was the mouse moving into the element and clicking always on the same pixel? That can indicate an attack to us. We've seen some very interesting patterns coming from click-forward bots because they understand that if you just click on the ad and there's no mouse interaction or human interaction, they'll get blocked. So in the code, they randomize some patterns, always move a number of pixels left, up, and do double click. But when you understand the logic, when you understand that this doesn't look like a human behavior, it has too much linearity to it or too much randomness in it, because humans are now linear or completely random. We call them semi-random. then you can start identifying who is a human and who is a bot. What's really interesting is that we started seeing a shift from the second and third generation bots into the fourth generation in the last couple of years because people and websites have started paying attention to this problem, to WBA, and they're trying to apply more and more logic. But from our experience, right now, very few solutions out there are able to handle the modern attacks, whether they are login brute force or click fraud or account abuse. Now that we understand what are we fighting, the different types of bots that we are fighting, it's important to understand how can you categorize them? How do you know if a specific bot is a human or not? And we are using two models in our decision-making algorithms, and this is something that you need to be thinking about as you categorize the threats and as you look at your web pages. The two models are decide whether we incriminate a user or we exonerate a user. When we try to incriminate a user, we start by assuming the user is a human. And it's up to the evidence that we see from the user, meaning the signatures, the mouse clicks, it's up to this evidence to prove us wrong. So if we are unable to decide if it's a human or a bot, or if we don't see evidence that it's a bot, we'll allow access to the website. If we are able to see evidence, if we are incriminating this user, then we block him. This works very well with a generation 1 and 2 bots, and sometimes a generation 3 bots, because they have very clear ways to incriminate. Hey, if you don't allow cookies, if you don't run JavaScript, it's very incriminating that you're not a human. The other model is the exoneration model. And here, we assume that the user, that the visitor, is not a human, and we look for proof in the user behavior, in the user actions, that would tell us this is not a bot. So and as you can see in the diagram, we allow the user in only after we collected enough evidence. Now, of course, you want to apply these two models in different sections of your website. On the home page, on category pages, you want to work in incriminate model. A user comes in, you don't want to impact the user experience. If it's the first page, sometimes you don't have enough information about the user to block him, so you will allow by default. Of course, you'll block anyone that you can incriminate. But other pages, we call them sensitive pages, you want to work with the exonerate model. I'm talking about the last step of the checkout, the place order button. I'm talking about the login post, where the user actually sends his credentials. When the user arrives into these sensitive parts of the business logic, you want to make sure that this is a human being. You want to be able to exonerate the user and allow him access only if we collected enough evidence to know that it's a human being. Next, I want to share a little bit about the attacks and the different generation of bots we've seen very recently. These attacks happen in every hour of every day on all of your website. I can guarantee that. If you're not watching that, if you don't try to detect them, you should. So the first example, a very classic account takeover attack, but with a few twists that makes it modern. This is not your late 2000 account takeover attack. First, it's very aggressive. 60 attempts per second, over 5 million attempts per day, with an 8% success rate, meaning 8 out of the 5 million attempts were successful in logging in. They compromised 8% of 5 million users. This means that they are using a very good user list. It's usually leaked or stolen from another website, but it's very current, vetted through. So users are reusing the same passwords. But besides being very aggressive, it is also very under the radar. It's very silent, very quiet, because it is coming from so many IPs. On this specific attack, we've seen 3,500 IPs every IP making about 1 request per minute, meaning every rate limiting control you have in place will not trigger for that IP, and they're only trying one user per IP one time. But what makes it really modern and really interesting is where these IPs are coming from. These are all IoT devices. As you've seen in the news recently, large attacks coming from many different IoT devices. This specific attack, as you can see in the Nmap screenshot, came from a Canon printer. It's a consumer-level network that a printer was infected or was serving as a proxy. So from the website perspective, this was a normal human being coming from a home network trying to log in once a minute. Next, I want to talk about scraping. Again, scraping with a twist, not your typical scraping. This is an example from a live attack we observed a little while ago. Scraping a very modern single-page application, excuse me, which means that the content is not actually rendered by the server. The content is served with JavaScript when the user clicks on a button. But this doesn't deter the attacker because they just use tools like Selenium to follow all the links. And Selenium would render the HTML, would execute the JavaScript, pull the content, and they simply export the data. You can see here on this polar chart, this is a 24-hour clock, how the attackers are very persistent. They come every 3 hours for a few minutes from hundreds of nodes, primarily from cheap hosting providers like Linode, DigitalOcean, and they execute and scrape the entire site within minutes, and they do this constantly. Unless you look at the behavior of every session, the behavior of every page request, it is going to be very hard to block this scraping attack. And the last attack I want to show is a fourth generation bot. And for any of you that can read code, the screenshot on the right is the actual payload, part of the payload. The payload itself was about 2,000 lines that was injected. The way that this attack works is the user gets infected with a malware. This is always the beginning. This is always step one. You get infected. Your users get infected. This malware installs a malicious Chrome extension into the user browser and waits until the user would go to that website, a very popular SaaS platform that many of you use on a daily basis. Once the user opens the page, the extension injects a block of JavaScript into the page, and that JavaScript executes a fake user registration. But not just a fake user registration, it would take the user information as it appears in Google and Facebook, because I remind you, this is a browser extension, which means that the user logging in to Facebook or Google is showing or giving the malware its username, its full name, its email. So this malware was actually registering with the real user email, with the real username, but with just a fake password that it would then communicate to the command and control center. We saw hundreds of thousands of executions of this malware from hundreds of thousands of users, meaning it was only executing from a single user once, or maybe once a week. But they didn't need to do that more than that because this malware was deployed or infecting many, many users. It took us a while to understand why are they creating fake users, but in this specific case, they were doing this to distribute malware. They found out that if they can create a fake user, they can then use this user to generate a landing page, and they generated millions of landing pages, which was very hard for Google and Facebook and the antivirus company to block. And they use these landing pages to actually distribute malware. But we've seen other cases for fake user creation, even on commerce. If you give away a discount code, you can expect many thousands of fake users on your platform. This attack was really difficult to identify for our customer because it looks completely legitimate. It's coming from a normal user, which would have normal credential, good email address, and it would not show any indication that it is coming from a bot. Many users would not even call this a bot, but it is, because the payload that gets injected into the page is actually a bot. The only way to identify that this is not a human being is by using WBA, collecting the metrics about the clicks, about the inserting of information to the form. As you can see in the code, they are simply injecting the information, the name, the email, the password, and they execute a JavaScript click, and then they wait a few seconds, and they execute another click. This is a pattern that if you learn the behavior of the user, you are able to identify. Of course, it requires a lot of machine learning in the backend, a lot of advanced hooking into elements on the page, but once you have that framework in place, identifying these type of attacks becomes immediate. I want to just run through a short summary and conclude what we presented over the last 40-some minutes. Automated threats continue to evolve. They continue to grow in the level of sophistication. When we started Perimeter X less than 3 years ago, the threat landscape was very different. When we reverse engineer a malware today, and we have a large lab running hundreds of variants of viruses and malware in it, when we see the level of sophistication, when we see how often malware gets updated remotely, folks, we are facing criminal organizations with large, smart, organized software teams behind them. Better than most software companies that I've seen. Some malwares, we see updates 3 times a day, all perfectly tested, very few bugs, very well-written code. And we need to be able to evolve our defenses. As Eric talked about WBA, we need to move to the next level from web application firewall, from simple rule-based detection, IP reputation, rate limiting, into understanding our users, their behavior, their interaction with our websites. Yes, it requires a very sophisticated and advanced sensor framework, and it requires big data and machine learning, but if you use the right technology, you can overcome these challenges. You can pose a large enough challenge to the attackers that they just move along. This is something we've seen again and again. They try multiple times, but if they see that they're unsuccessful, they move to the next target. Eric, back to you. Eric, maybe you're on mute?
I am on mute. Thank you. I was going to say you are a tough act to follow, Ami. So I love the technical. And actually, I loved it as soon as you started talking about threats. I heard sirens in the background, so I thought, oh, how appropriate is that? But anyway, we do have recommendations on how to apply WBA. And before I really start into this, let me remind you, we have had a flow of questions, so we will do a brief Q&A. But if something has come up during this presentation, please click on the questions and submit them, and we will get to them interactively or follow up after the webinar, via email or some manner. But what I found that in terms of best practices for WBA, if you're sitting back there thinking, I get it now. These attacks, we have great the developers, 3 releases a day that don't go through QA, and they work terrifically well. You need professionals to fight professionals, and hopefully, if we've done nothing else during this webinar, we've given you a sense of how Perimeter X and web behavior analytics really gives you that fighting chance against these attacks that use business logic. The way to approach it, one is, I do have a few recommendations. One is the cross-functional team. And the reason for this, and we always talked about cross-functional team, but nothing touches every aspect of your business like a website. So be sure going in, it's just not a security issue. It's an IT issue. It's the application owners. It's the service desk. It's in some cases even sales organizations who want to be sure about the user experience. But make sure you work cross-functionally. Say, hey, this is the deal. 40% of our attacks, are bot-driven. They carry this business logic abuse, which is going to escalate support costs from accounts that are taken over, and we're going to have users complaining. We're going to have data loss. We're going to have fraudulent transactions if you happen to be doing any kind of commerce. Really look at driving the company towards this, and agree on specific success metrics. And you can do that when the company is involved. When I talk about traffic patterns and user transactions, the amount of admin effort involved, traffic patterns. If you think about it, if you could strip out, I say 43% or whatever the percent is for your business for undesirable bot traffic, what does that do for performance? Does it bring clarity to your user transaction ratios? How many people get to shopping carts, how many people close them and exit them? Because you no longer have to worry about counting imposters and hackers in those numbers. They've been stripped out from the get-go. And then the big thing is just try it. My gosh, it's not that difficult to do. Omri can speak more about how to do it with Perimeter X than I can, but it's a pretty easy thing to incorporate into your website. Maybe even use it against a control site. And use it against something that's in production. So maybe it is not your mission critical website, but maybe it's the next tier down where you really understand the performance and you get a feel for for what life without bots will be. Get those success metrics before WBA. Run the product. I said 2 weeks here, maybe even less. I've seen some customers and security officers are astonished to get results in like an hour. It's really kind of scary. But give it a shot and give it a period of time, 2 weeks or a month, to be able to compare the metrics versus the norms and what it means to your business. And then because you've done things cross-functionally up front, you have the whole company involved. It should be a pretty easy decision on your website security strategy. And with that, I want to thank you and turn this over to Corinna, who is our Q&A monitor and expert here, and she will be putting Omri and I to the test about some of your questions.
Thank you, Eric. So we will now get into the Q&A session. Again, my name is Corinna Kruger. I'm VP of Marketing here at Perimeter X. We know that you have some burning questions, and I want to make sure that we answer them. So the first one is, I'm actually going to kick over to both of you, Eric, and I want you to go first and then Omri. So the question that came in is, how can I welcome friendly bots into my website while I'm blocking out the dangerous ones? Eric?
Okay, I'll go first. It's usually an exception list, and because there are bots that are when we talk about friendly bots, we mean things like search engines, where you want a search engine to come through your site to be able to drive up the rating score so that you appear high on the list from that search engine. And these things provide us to your website, but they're not really scraping data. They're using it for purposes that are beneficial to you. And usually there's a pretty simple matter to be able to say, yeah, I want Google, I want Bing, I want these places to have access to my sites, and maybe it's an affiliated partner that's collecting prices that you have a business relationship with. These are things that security and IT people can tell you, like, yes, let's make sure these guys have access and deny access to everybody else or slow them down. Sometimes it's not always a block or allowed type of decision. But that's one of the first things that comes up, Karina, is I've got some bots that I need for my business. I need to be able to pump out prices or information to my supply chain, and search engines is the typical example there.
Yeah, and we've been trying to get a great whitelist of good bots for over the past 2 years. We have very clear guidelines on when a provider, when a bot will be categorized as good. 4 criteria. First, the bot needs to announce itself. Think about Google. The Google bot comes in, it says, I am Googlebot. This is the URL where you can learn more about me. Second rule is you need to honor robots.txt. I assume most of you know what robots.txt is. It's a file where you tell the bot where they are allowed to go and where they shouldn't be going. Third rule, you should have, the bot provider should have an ability to validate the bots. It can be IP list, it can be a token that is cryptographically signed, but if there is no way to validate that this bot is coming from Google, for example, people are going to abuse it. By the way, it's a beautiful thing to see how many people actually try to scrape the web with a Google user agent. They probably don't understand that it's very easy to know who really is a Google crawler. And the fourth, which is a little bit trickier, is don't be too aggressive. We have many, for example, Chinese search engines which satisfy the 3 first terms, but they are very aggressive. They'll be 10 times more aggressive than Google, and then they get blocked as well. Of course, every customer can configure the list on its own. Karina, back to you.
Thank you.
And that's the cool thing, as those search engines announce themselves, they basically telegraph what the acceptable behavior is. So you're always looking, and you know what to look for to make sure that it really is Google and not someone like impersonating Google and doing that kind of continuous checking all the way through.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you. So next question is for Omri. How do I get visibility into the bots I have on my site? This is one of our attendees asking.
Yeah. So it's imperative that you understand your traffic. You can't implement any security mechanism without understanding your traffic. If you don't know who is a human being or a bot on your website, go and implement a tool. Of course, I'm advocating for you to take our tool and test it, but you should use something to identify. We provide you with a very simple JavaScript snippet that would profile the user and would give you great understanding and great analytics on the type of bots and the type of threats that you see on the website. Every single time, people are surprised by what they see. People come to us complaining about scraping just to figure out that they have a huge account takeover problem. Or they come to us because they think people are getting fake users, but then they see that 85% of their checkout traffic is bots. So it's really important to first understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I see the same thing, Omri. It's every CSO I've talked to that has a WBA implementation is just amazed at how much of that bad traffic their website has been exposed to. It's just without fail.
So next question, I think, I want to kick it over to Eric first, and then Omri chime in. Are there other benefits once I get the unwanted bots out of my clickstream?
Well, actually, I'm kind of big on these, because what we find is once you get these bad bots out, is all of a sudden your business ratios and your performance ratios are a lot more accurate. I mean, you've kind of standardized on what people do as you follow them through your websites, but now all of a sudden all that intelligence starts reflecting actual users, which puts your company in a business to deliver better user experiences, because the data you're operating on is so much better. You find performance increases. Obviously, if you take out a lot of your traffic and a lot of your stepping through the websites, you can get through. You have more server power and cycle power to be able to satisfy your valid users. You'll find transaction rates and fraud rates go down. Not transaction rates go down, but your fraudulent transaction rates go down. And a lot less time on your security team chasing down security incidents or reputed security incidents. It just focuses your website so much more on your business and on the actual users. And when you think of it, it's not like employees. When you're talking websites, your users, I mean, are millions. I mean, they're big numbers of people. So improving that really has a hugely positive impact on your business. But those are the benefits I see mostly. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Omri.
No, I want to follow up with a semi-related answer here, because you said something very interesting about business metrics. Whenever we start an implementation, we always put business metrics first. I don't want to block bots just for the sake of blocking bots. And we always put the question out there, what will help your business? I can tell you for a few examples. We started blocking scraping for a customer. Their SEO ranking jumped 51%. So their Google location on average on all of their pages jumped by 51%. This has a huge impact on the business. Another customer, once we started blocking account abuse and login brute force, more users started paying and buying accounts, because why pay if you can go and just buy an account for $3? Why pay $9.99 a month? So these business metrics are what's critical for you when you think about implementation. Don't implement a security solution just for the sake of implementation. Implement it because it has impact on your business.
Yeah, and that's great advice. I couldn't agree more. We should be wrapping up. I think, I don't know if we have time. I guess I just leave this in the hands of Karina.
So I have one more question here that I definitely want to get an answer. We can't get to all of them, but this is, Omri, for you. I'm using IP reputation and rate limiting. Am I protected?
So unfortunately not. All recent attacks we've seen from generation 2, 3, and 4 all came through a proxy network. With the latest release of the IoT devices hacks, expect to see thousands and tens of thousands of IPs carrying the attack. They're all consumer-level network, which means you can't block them. You can't go and block all of Verizon or tens of thousands of phones on Verizon. That would impact your business. Reputation is dead. Rate limiting is dead, unfortunately.
Thank you. Okay, so this concludes our session. Kimberly, back to you.
Okay, thank you everybody for attending today's webinar. As I said in the beginning, these slides will be available to download after the presentation is over, and any questions that were unanswered, the Perimeter X team will be following up with you on. Thank you again for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day.